Let's get started. My name is Gallant, and I'm going to be kind of running you through the quick kind of basics of pewter casting because I know nothing about the advanced pewter casting. Pewter casting it's kind of interesting what all you can do with it. I just pulled some. I mean, there are coins you can do. This is the baronial shield wall token we got years ago. Obviously, site tokens. I think this was a site token as well. Or little charms. You also can go rather large with it. Yeah, I kind of have a weird plethora of stuff. There it is. From an event a while ago, ended up finding this guy, but he's really large. What, 2 inches? Yeah, coins, pendants, game pieces is something I'm interested in doing a lot with it. I've done the side tokens. I know Ivan's done the belt buckles, and he really uses it for the outside frame of the belt buckle. But the bar and the prong that actually attach to the belt, those are better out of steel because pewter's not a very strong material. And then like studs or grommets you can do with it because it's so soft. If you leave the sprue on, you're looking at a casting. This is the sprue, and if you cut it off here, you could pound this down and it would mushroom out, and so you could attach it to something. General things you need. Pewter, of course. It's sold in what they call ingots. Oh, cool. Pulled some out. And generally, I get it on eBay. I tend to aim for around the $100 mark. I found that that's kind of the best weight to price ratio that you can get. I found I like this shape more because when I put it in a pan, it actually contacts more of the heat at the bottom. But I think I like this pewter better. It seems to just have less impurities, so it casts a little better. And so just kind of looking at the sheen of it and such is kind of what I'm learning on that. Soapstone, the actual thing you're gonna be making the mold out of. The molds end up looking like this guy. And soapstone's super easy to carve. It just comes in random chunks. This is kind of my box of rocks. And there's Dick Blick is where we've gotten it forever. I know that's where Ivan got it. That's where I've always gotten it. And you can kind of get the bigger pieces, which are more expensive. Or what I tend up doing is getting kind of the lot, just of broken pieces. And I find, I can get, probably 2 out of this or 1 long one. I mean, for Secret Site token, it was 1 long one. For something I'm working on, which is actually, I'm hoping to be a god-awful grail kind of look. I'm hoping to get 2 of them, 1 here and 1 here, so I can reuse the mold. Heating device. I have upgraded. I used to just put it literally a tin can on the stove because pewter only needs to get to about 500 degrees before it melts. So it's super easy to get it. I used to have an old dog food can that, washed, 3 or 4 times, and then you just like crimp the corner to kind of get that little pour spout. What I usually ended up doing was just grabbing it with a pair of pliers, picking it up and pouring it. And that was super easy. And that's how I did it for many years until actually this last round of stuff. And then I ended up getting the portable heater and then just a little saucepan. It's like a little 1.5 ounce saucepan or something. That's been working really nicely. Safety gear, gloves are like the one thing. I have some thin gloves I've been using, and I end up with pouring the pewter because the mold gets super hot, just doubling it. And that works okay, but I should get some welding gloves. For carving it, you should have a mask, goggles if you're using a Dremel on the soapstone. When you're cleaning it, you're gonna want a pair of flush cutters. It allows you to cut super close to the surface. Like if I'm actually trying to cut right near that line, it allows me to get like right up on it. So, and that's been actually super Super nice, especially with things like this, like little overpour right here, because you can just bring it up close to it and just clip those off. And you actually could hit it with a little file, but it's fairly smooth. That's how we did all of Sigurd's site tokens, and those worked out pretty well.
Did you see the question about what pewter is made of?
No, I did not. It is a mixture of things. What is it? It's like it's tin and nickel, I believe. But on eBay, you want to make sure that you get the one without lead, because it actually used to have lead, therefore all the lead poisoning and stuff from the pewter plates. And so now clearly they make it without lead. So yeah, lead-free pewter. It is a mixture of metals and, yeah, I think it's tin and nickel, but I could totally be wrong on that. So as for additional tools, drill and drill bits for pinning some of the molds, and we can take a look at a pin a little later. The other two things, a sanding block. This is one of those soft ones, which isn't great for this because you really want it flat. I find, or have seen, that taking a piece of sandpaper and actually just spray gluing it, spray adhesive, the Super 77 stuff, down to a flat board works really well. That actually allows you to a nice flat, just finish after you cut the sandstone, the soapstone. And then something I stumbled upon years ago was dental tools. I have done it to where you actually take the big nails, you bang them into the shapes you want, and you carve it that way. That works. It really does. These work better because it actually allows you different, actually giving you a point. It'll show. There we go. This is probably one of my favorite ones that has more of a flat side on each side. And then where'd the third one go? Oh, there it is. Just flat scrapers. It's super nice. And depending on what you're doing, like on the site token I did for Sigrid, I used this guy, and it actually helped smooth out the mold. So that was super nice. Getting to the process of it. First thing I do is I end up drawing it out, because there's several things that actually allows you to do. It allows you to make sure that your soapstone is big enough. You draw it out full-sized. I'm an addict of grid paper, so I'm constantly drawing things full size or to a scale. This was the original concept for the crown token. And then when I drew it full scale, I had the front and back, and then I was trying to draw a section, kind of a section up here looking through it, and then in a more of an elevation. Sort of important, mainly because you don't want to have any sort of undercuts. When you're looking at a mold, if you take a cross section of the mold, you really want the pewter to be able to get out once you cast it and not have any sort of undercut underneath the stone, because then you'd have to break it to actually get it out, or do a multi-piece mold. The more pieces to your mold, the more trouble it is. I've actually I tried a couple 3-part molds. I don't like them. They're super finicky and hard to work with. So I'm personally going to try to keep everything to a 2-part mold, because I just find that stuff comes out cleaner. All right. As for carving, kind of start with cutting the soapstone. And honestly, it's just a regular saw. I've done it with a wood saw, and it's just super soft. I mean, it doesn't take you very long to cut it at all. And then I just find that those pieces need to be sanded. And that's kind of why this soft one doesn't work so well, because as I'm pushing down to sand it, it could curve in a little bit, which will then give a slight curve to it. But I mean, because it's so soft, it just kind of gives it a glass finish, which is nice. For the carving itself, I mean, literally, it just picks out. I find for some of the rough shaping, if it's a larger piece like this, like the crown token, I ended up using the Dremel to start to get the shape. And then I switched over to this to finalize it, just because I didn't want to blow past the shape. I found that soapstone has some interesting hard pieces in it, and I can feel one of them right here. Let's see if we can get that to focus. I don't know if you can see how that's kind of crisscrossed, as it only chips out like where I've scratched it, because there's a very hard piece right here. And I found if I hit that with a Dremel, typically it goes through it, no problem. Sometimes it'll grab it, and I've had it rip it out before. So it's just kind of being cautious with it, because it's a stone. I mean, it's a natural material, so it has errors in it. Let's see. And with a mold, you really want to. So you have kind of a funnel sprue. Which one is this? Oh, yeah, the O'Driscole coin. And this is where you're going to pour the pewter. And then inside, you also have these like vent lines. Bring both of these up. So these kind of straight lines or crisscross lines, this kind of motley look, actually gives an air a place to go as the pewter is going in. So you typically will get a cleaner pour. These are what I'm calling pins. I'm sure they have a much better name than that, but it actually allows you to reline up the mold. Something I did on the crown token is I have 3 pins. That allows this one to be fully in place and this one to move a bit. That's for a 3-part mold, that's really nice, because then that allows you to kind of pull this part to try and get the casting out, but you know that this one's always in place. The thing I ran into here, which is why I won't do 2 again, is these kind of slide and move. So it's kind of hard when I have that, or I was starting to put a design on the back, to make sure that that's always in the same place as according to the front. So that's why pinning's nice. In a 2-part mold, you really only need 2, because there's only 1 piece, so it doesn't move independently. And I would do it a little deeper than this. These are probably 1/8 of an inch, and I'd probably shoot for more of a 1/4 of an inch deep. And I just did that by drilling through. I put this together, rubber banded it. I drilled through the top, and then I just made sure I just went to the bottom a bit, and literally I just poured pewter over a hole, and it filled itself in. The bigger pour funnels, I'm finding, actually are working a little better. So that's why on this one that I'm working on, I'm trying an even larger pour funnel. So I had this just on the stove. Melts up pretty easily. This typically happens, pours all over the place. And then I just wait till it goes kind of that, it's not chrome anymore. It's literally just almost turns like a matte finish. And that's kind of when my own indication is that it's cool enough that I can take it apart. So, I mean, clearly there's a lot more to do on here. The sides aren't meeting up quite right. That's why we kind of have that flashing on the side. And then, it only has a very basic shape that needs a lot more refining. But with this, I mean, I figured I would cut off the sprue probably here, and that way you could drill it and use it almost like a pendant. Thought that would be nice. But yeah, so the larger funnels allow you to pour in and hopefully not spread all over yourself. You aren't wasting the pewter. That's actually at that top sprue because you can cut it and this will easily remelt. Cast as you carve. Let's see if you can see this. This was the mold for the lamps got broken, so I redid one or copied it, and as I was pouring it, as I was carving it, I was pouring them, and you really ended up seeing to where, you know, obviously the surface just needed to be super clean because you can see all the scratch marks, and so that's kind of why you want to do it as you go along. The fogginess is actually because I've been running my pewter a little too hot, and I'm working on balancing that since it's a new setup. A lot of times when the molds are cold, you'll end up getting pours like this. That's kind of when I open the mold and go, huh, well, that's interesting. So if the warmer the molds are, especially on bigger pieces, the more the pewter is going to flow in, and which is why thick gloves, because then the mold actually gets rather hot the more you pour. Cleaning up, as I mentioned, like the fogginess, I ended up just taking a Dremel with a burnishing wheel, and that came right off. I had no problem with that. Cutting off the sprues, you know, they literally just same flush cutters. They come right off, and then it was just trimming the edge, which has been super nice with the flush cutters. Next time I'll definitely buy a better pair. Let's see in the notes. I just had a couple examples of what you've seen of the coin and the site token.
What's a good temp for the pewter?
I would say just over melting. I believe it melts. I think it's like 495 or something, or 550. It's like it's right around that range. I can easily hit it with a stove, with just a kitchen stove. And so, you know, if it gets too hot, you end up getting that kind of fogginess to it. So I mean, I just kind of watch it and see how it, you know, see when it melts, and then gives it a couple more minutes at heat, and then, you know, start going from there. It also kind of depends on how cold your mold is. You can pour open molds. It's actually what this guy is, but you can see it domes the back. Yeah, a little bit. And so it just takes a lot more pewter to do that.
Can the cutoffs be reused?
Oh, you mean remelt it?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You can put all this back in, and it will just melt up beautifully without a problem. I mean, and actually on that, if you have a lot of pieces you're redoing, I actually have a second one, so I can start to melt it in here. And then if I'm working on this one, because the cold pewter is going to drop the temperature, I end up putting some in this one to start to melt it. And then once it's liquid, I'll pour it into the big one and then restart another piece in the small one. That actually just speeds it up, because I end up doing, like 100 site tokens. And if I waited every time, well, because, we always wait to the last minute to actually do the crafts, it would take a lot longer to, put the pewter in and wait for it to melt. Whenever you're done with a mold or putting it away, something, I even forgot who told me, but like I literally just leave a casting in that mold. That way, next time I pull it out, I can see kind of what needs work. Like here, the background needs work. I need more definition on the words. So, like on this, clearly I need to level out the back. I need to get like 2 different levels on the bore, and then go over the words probably at least twice more, and clean up the edges across here. So that's just me being fussy though with it. Now, I know I kind of blew through that, so what questions do you guys have?
The vent lines you were talking about, how deep do they need to be? Do you need to go all the way to the edge, or just need to give it a little room, or what?
I know I do it so scientifically. I find about 3 scratches. I find if I take it and I literally going to the edges probably isn't a bad idea, but when I do it, I usually find it's late, and yeah, I mean that's probably a 64th of an inch. I mean, it's really barely, anything might be 30, between 64th and 32nd, but it's just like 3 scratch lines on top of each other, and that gives it more than enough. Any deeper than that, and pewter tends to try and find its way in there, and so it kind of gives you some more cleanup. And going to the edge isn't necessarily a bad idea, but I mean, you can see from here, some hit the edge, some don't.
Thank you.
Of course. What else did you guys have questions on?
I have a question.
When you're carving it, if you make a mistake and like carve too deep, is there a way to fix that, or are you just screwed and need to start over?
It's very hard to put material back once you've carved it. That's why I like the going slow and casting as you go. Depending on how deep you carve, you can always just make everything else slightly deeper or leave the imperfection. It's kind of that 3-foot rule in a way, I guess. People really aren't gonna, most people, let me say that, aren't going to, inspect it so deeply. So in a way, that's kind of why I prefer going slow on the carving, just because I have some theories of how to put some material back or if it cracks, and that's using more of a high temperature epoxy, and then mixing in some soapstone dust. But I haven't been able to try it yet. Every time I make something to crack it, it either catastrophically cracks or it doesn't crack at all, which is super frustrating when you're trying to do it, because when the like on the lamp, there was a small piece missing. Actually, it wasn't bad if you just cast it. I mean, obviously there was a hairline crack through it. I actually took a casting of it just to kind of see how bad it was. This was a dropped mold, and you can see this crack right here was the damage, and it looked a lot worse in person when you're looking at the mold than in here. So my thought was, in the mold itself with the crack, was coming down and going in and then filling the excess with that high temperature epoxy, kind of slurry, and then just kind of buffing it out. But that's kind of for the adding material back. That was at least my current thought. But mainly go slow is all I can think. And that's why I just kind of rough in the shapes with the Dremel, and then you go to the hand tools. Any other questions?
The gunk that is sort of forming on the top of your melted pewter, do you have to skim that off, or can you just leave it?
I've done both, and I haven't really noticed an issue with, it pouring. I mean, it is kind of a skin, and I have a feeling it is the impurities. I have scraped it off before, because, of course. Yeah, because if I take a dental tool to it, you can see I can just pick it right off. I do find that it'll kind of build up at the edge of the kind of the pour spout, and I do end up cleaning that off. I don't think most of it gets in there. I think it's actually a very small percentage, and then it's just kind of keeping the vessel clean that you're pouring from. When the pewter's done, I do end up turning it over and kind of banging it out, and then just clean up that. It's just some small pieces, impurities from it, from its own manufacturing.
Someone posted in the chat, do you have any recommendations for books or resources?
I don't. I'm sure there are a lot out there. I know I've seen some pewter castings in like books on pilgrimages and such. I know it was kind of large in that. I know when Simon and Magdalene were Baron and Baroness, we were kind of talking a little bit about maybe making a pilgrimage kind of pendant to give people. But as for the casting itself, I'm sorry, I don't. This is one of those random, Saturdays over at Ivan's, and he's like, I'm gonna cast. It's like, well, I want to learn that. So I'm sorry, I don't have too many of the literary resources for you.
Someone posted, what was the stone? And it is soapstone, you said. Where did you get the soapstone from?
I get it. It's actually why I made sure to include the links. There's a Google slideshow off the class listing. It is, I believe it's Dick Blick Art Supplies. Yeah, Dick Blick Art Supplies, and they sell large chunks of the stone, which I've never gotten because I find that just their small cuts or off cuts work just fine for probably everything we do.
How do you spell that?
DICKBLICK.
Do you prefer hand tools or do you actually prefer the dental tools? I mean, sorry, do you prefer the Dremels or the hand tools?
I prefer the Dremel because I am impatient. The dental tools give you a much or a far superior finish, which is why I go as far as I can with the Dremel, and then I begrudgingly switch over to the hand tools. But that's because I'm impatient.
On one of the pieces you did, I saw the lettering on it and it was pretty clear and clean. Do you hand carve that in, or do you have a special tool for getting the lettering in reverse, how you would need to in the casting?
I actually hand letter that in, and I tend to first try and write it very lightly with essentially whatever my finest tip is at the time. So I can try and get the spacing right and the arcing right, knowing that I'm going to finish the surface a little bit more. So anything that's a little off, it's just going to vanish. Like the broken mold, how it doesn't really show up. You can do super light lines that totally read, but is soft, but is not as deep as scratches, and so you'd only see it if you really leave them and you pour over that entire area. But yeah, I end up, that's not really the tool, but yeah, I totally end up just going over it super fine first and then working it deeper. And I am not great at writing backwards, but because of this, I'm having to get better. So wherever the camera is. So yeah, and the more you go over it, the deeper it'll get, and the more pronounced the letters will be. Obviously, the hardest thing, probably about the mold making, is actually understanding that everything's kind of in reverse. So the further it is away from you, the more pronounced the final element will be. I hadn't thought about that till now, but yeah. So, like with this one, clearly the sword is the deepest, or I'd put the sword in and I went, oh great, the vine needs to be deeper. And so I ended up digging this, to be deeper than the sword. So it would kind of read as it's going in front of it. And if you're doing elements like this, you can always leave a little space, kind of like the Celtic knots do. And it totally, to people, reads as going behind. And it gives you a differentiation between the items.
Do you ever darken or patina your pewter?
I've been looking into that. I have not found a product I can do that with yet. I know T.A. Caden Town used to sell a chemical, like chemical wash that actually could change the color of steel. And so it used to be sold at Michael's, but that was 15 years ago. So and I didn't see it when I looked. Now this isn't steel, but I was looking to kind of see if there was a way to change it. And other than painting it, I haven't found one yet, but I'm super curious to try and find, well, actually black is kind of what I've been looking for, but you know, any of the individual colors would be nice. I don't think you could get this. I think annealing it would be hard because I think the pewter would just melt at that temperature.
I love that design. What's that for?
This was for
It was
the
fun.
crown tournament that Sigurd did just a couple months ago.
But the actual design is taken off of the flyer for the very first SCA meeting.
Aw, I like that.
And Gallant did a really great job transferring it from the original.
Well, thank you.
If you want to see his sketches, they're actually in the handout from this class.
So that was the original sketch when Sigurd and I were talking, and then the whole full size. You know, it actually, for this, because I knew it was a larger one, I went out and I looked at the pieces of soapstone I had, and so I knew kind of the largest dimension I felt it comfortable being. Soapstone gets hot the more you pour into it, so I always try and leave, you know, a good space around it. Also, I know there's pinning and such, so that's kind of what I started, was centering it and going, okay, well, I figured out what I wanted this dimension to be. I kind of left a little over ½ an inch, probably 5/8 on either side here, and then I figured how wide I wanted it to be for a good design. And then I went through and figured out how large the sword should be. I did try and do the hole, which I typically ended up drilling out anyway, because on a lot of these, the pewter got behind it because of the 3-part mold, and where it splits is right over that, right over this, so it would cover it with a small film of it, and I'd end up cleaning that up.
How many tokens did you make for this event, and how long did it take you?
Sigurd asked for 100, and I was battling at the time that fogginess, because I didn't know what had caused it. I didn't know if it was because it was cooling too fast or it was too hot at the time. I hadn't really gotten into the research of that, and so I probably cast 300 of them, 250 to 300, I would say, because I found about 1 out of every 3 came out pretty well, and then you just melt the rest, so that's easy. The carving of the mold probably took me working a couple hours a night, maybe a week. I mean, it wasn't bad. And then for the actual casting, I don't know. I think that took 8 or 9 hours to just pound it out, and just just keep melting things and keep pouring, and then at the end of the night, look at them all, figure out what I'm keeping, cut and put the rest back in to the box to be remelted the next night.
I will also tell you that he did an incredibly fast job given the timeline he was given.
Thank you. Thankfully, I'm a night owl, so staying up to 1 or 2 is easy.
Can you use pewter with silicone molds?
There is. I have not done it myself, but I know there is high temperature silicone that goes up to, 700 or 800, and as long as you regulate, how about that? Regulate the temperature of your pewter. I don't see why you couldn't. It is something I've been interested in for silicone itself. Reynolds Advanced Materials is out of Phoenix, and I know that's where Brian Petty in town, who does a lot of the Star Wars casting, he gets his epoxy and silicones from there, and he's been very happy with how those have come out. So that's actually something I've been looking at. I did get a regular silicone, kit from them to start learning it. That is a whole nother rabbit hole I'm actually looking forward to. And yeah, I do want to try the high temperature, because then that would allow me to just, carve a wax or carve a wood, or even reproduce something that someone else has already done.
Great, thank you.
Of course. Okay, well, if no one else has anything, thank you guys so much for coming.